it is absolutely an honor to be a part of this really very important conference. I'm Penny Randall, and I lead the CNS Center of Excellence at IQVIA. And I had planned to be in Santa Clara today, but my Achilles tendon had a different plan for me. But as Jackie said, probably there's not a better topic to discuss remotely than remote trial design. So here we go. Maybe we can advance to the next slide, please. There we go. What you see here, and this is a technology adoption curve, and you can Google this and look at any number of technology adoption curves for different types of technologies, like electricity, the iPad, and so forth. And you see how a new technology disseminates through a population. And this is one for decentralized clinical trials. And it's anchored on the left side by the very pioneering work that was done by Pfizer with the remote trial in 2011 in overactive bladder. And I'm going to talk about that trial a little bit later as an example of how you might analyze a protocol for suitability for virtual trials. But anyway, we've got the very beginning of this journey was in 2011. And that, by the way, was the same year that the iPhone was launched. And over the last 11 years, you initially had this enthusiasm and kind of some frothiness around decentralized clinical trials. And not unexpectedly, it was followed by this disillusionment. And then here we are in the S part of the curve, starting right about 2017 or so, where again, companies and stakeholders were beginning to see the value of decentralized approaches. We came to market in 2018 with the IQVIA decentralized platform, and we built it, and there was some interest, but certainly not as much as we had hoped. And then all of a sudden, the world changed. And the catalyst was the pandemic, where, and I think Lily Froelich from Cerevel said it very nicely, that by necessity, companies and other stakeholders needed to see what tools were available to keep vital research going on. And that was dusting off and looking afresh at decentralized approaches. And that was a real catalyst. So this S curve steepened in 2020, and we're seeing, I think, a much faster uptake and dissemination and interest in decentralized trials than what we would have had without the pandemic. And now here we are, an industry and a patient population and scientists all bracing for yet the next, which was actually the next shock, and that's the war in Ukraine. So many of us have studies running in Ukraine, and we're using and relying on these approaches again to keep patients safe, to monitor data, ensure that data is high quality and has integrity. So again, I don't think we're going back. I think these tools have proven themselves, and we'll see more and more adoption. There we go. And so what is the value? I mean, I think we all have a good sense of what the advantages of decentralized approaches are. And I was just reflecting on the caregiver perspective that was just presented, sort of describing the burden that patient and caregiver has to carry when participating in a clinical trial, and the promise of a decentralized approach, stripping away a lot of the transportation burden and really literally bringing the trial to the patient when possible. So I think for me, that's the major benefit of a decentralized approach, is that you're lessening the burden to patients. And in so doing, you're really breaking down, if you will, the walls of a brick and mortar investigative site and making it possible for more folks to participate with epilepsy, different subpopulations, different ethnicities. If you don't have to constantly drive to a study site, even with a hybrid design approach where there's some face-to-face visits and some virtual visits, that's a big plus. I think also the study design, and I was looking at the agenda for tomorrow, a very compelling group of folks and companies represented here at the conference talking about sensors and different digital approaches in clinical research as well as clinical care. I think the future of using decentralized approaches and sensors is very positive as we can gather more data, richer data streams to inform our knowledge about epilepsy, digital biomarkers, and so forth. So I think there's a lot to offer with decentralized clinical trials. Next slide, please. There we go. I think everyone in this audience has a good sense of what we're talking about with a decentralized clinical trial. But just to level set, this graphic shows on the left-hand side our traditional brick and mortar trials, right? Sites where patients will go to the sites at every visit, all the assessments are done there. And then on the other extreme of the spectrum, anchored is the fully decentralized approach, where often it's one investigator, patients are recruited from different states. There's absolutely no crossing of the threshold. Everything is done remotely. Shipment of study drug, the assessments, e-diaries, whatever, everything is done remotely with telehealth visits often. And I will say in our experience at IQVIA, for interventional trials, most of our customers are somewhere in the middle of the spectrum, that when they're considering a decentralized approach, that particularly with epilepsy, the need to really have confidence in the diagnosis, the subtype, really getting a good history and understanding the medication treatments. A lot of that is enabled by a face-to-face visit, particularly if the PI is not the treating neurologist. And so we find that most folks really are looking at trial designs that are more in the center here. Now, I think all bets are off for non-interventional observational studies where lower the burden as much as you possibly can. A fully decentralized approach is often most suitable. If we can advance the slide, please. There we go. But I think the critical success factor when you embark on and considering whether your study is appropriate for decentralized approach, either fully decentralized or a hybrid approach, is to invest in a thorough analysis at the front end and looking at different parameters that would steer you in one direction, maybe towards a more decentralized design versus less decentralized, more reliance on face-to-face visits. And on the left-hand side of the slide, I've really mapped up what we really focus on. This is high level, and I'll show you, some worksheets about how we really try to risk stratify a decentralized trial through this analysis. But let me just throw out a couple of examples as a part of the analysis. A compound, when you're looking at a compound, obviously one of the first things you want to know is, what's the evolving safety signal? Are you comfortable with, remote surveillance of a subject, or is it really early days and you'd feel much more comfortable as the safety signal is unfolding to have the patient closer to the study site? I think that's one of the primary analysis that has to be done. The formulation of the compound, is it PO, is it IV, intrathecal? All of these parameters matter. The patient population. So obviously here we're all very focused on epilepsy, and as many have said before me, the burden of coming and going to a trial site, maybe to a caregiver taking a child to a study site, would favor, if the other parameters line up, a more decentralized approach. I'm going to save the design considerations for my case study in a moment, because I think this is really something that's often overlooked and really important. I'll give you a concrete example where how it can play out. But the face, earlier phase work, heavy PK populations, MAD, SAD studies, most folks opt for just a standard traditional design. Endpoint, well, epilepsy, a lot of times we rely on the seizure diaries. And so there's not a barrier here, which is really nice with epilepsy. When I think about other neurologic conditions, think about MS, primary endpoint, often the EDSS, the really sophisticated neurologic exam. You're not going to be able to do that with high data integrity and validation remotely. It's not possible. So we're in a good place in terms of the endpoint, I believe, with epilepsy. And then and I think this is sometimes another item that's forgotten. It's hard to innovate. It's hard to integrate technology into a trial, and there should be a payoff. So when you really are getting down to it and you're analyzing your protocol, you're looking at your schedule of events, you're saying, well, we could easily make this visit remote. Think about it in totality. Is there enough advantage in making a visit remote when every other visit is in the clinic? Is it worth doing? Is there enough benefit that's to be derived from it? Because innovation is always hard. Let me just move to the next slide and show you a little deeper dive. Now, I don't expect anyone to be able to read this, but these are just worksheets that map to these different parameters. We're really trying to codify the risk and understand exactly what the benefits, the risks are in a given protocol, and trying to translate it into some sort of decentralized trial, whether it's fully decentralized or a hybrid trial. Now, let's move to the next slide. And this is the case study. It's in the public domain, and I talked to Craig Lipset about it many, many times. And I thought it might be a nice way just to sort of think about a real study, the pioneering study, which I think we as members of the industry are really grateful for the great work that Craig and his team at Pfizer did with this study. So just to level set, this was a study that was done in 2011, completely virtual trial. Patient population are those individuals with overactive bladder, and the study drug is an approved drug. It's on the market, Detrol, for many years. So let me go back. Can we please go back to my original slide? Just keep that in mind, and let's go back to the original slide, 2 slides up, with the 5 parameters where you start analyzing the trial. If we can just go back to that. Did I lost my slides. While those slides are going up, I think I was just going to, if we could just go, those slides, I don't save them yet. Well, I can talk you through. I can, there we go. Just back up a couple more, please. One more. There we go. Perfect. Thank you very much. So let's think about that Pfizer remote study. So we can quickly run through this. The compound, I think there's a big green check mark on that. It's a drug that's approved, has a very well-established safety profile, Detrol. And so when you're thinking about decentralized trial, absolutely, I don't see red flags. Patient population, we've got a very stable population with overactive bladder. Again, big check mark, not concerning, and certainly would favor a decentralized approach. Endpoint measurement. See, I'm going to skip over the design consideration because that's the critical issue with the remote trial. Endpoint consideration, bladder diaries. That was the primary endpoint. So that's pretty straightforward. E-pros, not a barrier to, not a significant barrier to a decentralized approach. Now, the design consideration, phase is 4, so that's fine. It's not too early. In fact, this is a sweet spot to be in, phase 4 study. But the details matter. And so what the Pfizer team did was they took the registration protocol design for their Detrol program, the registration study, and recast it as a completely virtual trial. And so when you look at the schedule of events and what study participants needed to do, they would go in, they would be screened, recruited, enrolled, and during screening, they had to complete bladder diaries for 3 days, 2 times during screening. So 3 days of bladder diaries. So it's 6 days of charting the bladder function. And then they had to collect 24-hour urine specimens 3 times during screening. Now, put that in the context of subjects that had no relationship with the PI. PI is a part of a coordinating center, had no relationship with the patient. And you think about the burden and there was really no trust, no relationship between the subject and the PI. And so now I'm going to ask you to advance to that one slide ahead with the funnel, one more, and I'll show you from this paper that was the write-up of the remote trial what happened. So you see a funnel here, roughly 21,000 patients were interested in participating. They landed on a web page about the remote trial. Many of them went through eligibility criteria remotely. They fell out of the funnel. And then finally, you see the 70% dropout. So we lost a lot of folks there. And then 450 or so patients ended up signing the informed consent because they met the study criteria. They had overactive bladder. But what happened, only 18 patients were enrolled and completed the study. Only 18 out of the 21,000 that initially expressed interest. And there was a huge drop off. 85% of the subjects dropped off when they were doing the bladder diaries, the urine collections. And so the take home message here, and again, I'm really grateful this is truly pioneering and fine work that was done with this study. But I think with benefit of hindsight, one can sort of say, well, is there another way to sort of design this? Could this have been designed differently, this study? And I think yes. I mean, the study, the data wasn't going to support an NDA. And I think, again, reflecting on the comments from Lily, the idea of can we do things differently to streamline our studies, particularly if we're thinking about a decentralized approach. And I think it's so important. Study design always matters, and the burden on subjects. Okay, next slide, please. All right, I'm going to end here with just a couple of comments around where are clinical trials, decentralized clinical trials happening, and first globally, and then I'll cover the US. What you see is a map of the world. I wish it had names on the countries, but green countries are where the conditions are most favorable for decentralized clinical trials. So we're doing a lot of work in the United States and Canada, some countries in Latin America, Western Europe. The amber golden color is also mostly favorable. So there's some Eastern European countries, you see Australia in green here. And then this is from the IQVIA perspective, our own experience. We're moving into China and developing the decentralized clinical trial platform for that country, and should be there in about 6 months. Now, when you do this sort of coding, and say, wow, this country is favorable, has a favorable environment for decentralized clinical trials, there's a lot of different components in that assessment. One is e-signatures. And not all countries will allow e-signatures. In fact, many, including Hungary, Bulgaria, Greece, require that the patient have a wet signature on the informed consent. But it is changing. Just in the last year, Denmark and Australia came around to accepting fully remote e-signatures. So the world is changing. This is a dynamic map. But there are a lot of different components besides e-signatures. What about the availability of home health and nursing that you would, a resource that you would consider using when you want to obtain laboratory samples or do assessments at home? There's a lot of components that roll up into this determination about whether a country is favorable for DCTs or not. And finally, let me maybe go to the next slide. just comment on the United States. Now, there's a lot of data on this slide. Bottom line is the US is a very good place to conduct decentralized clinical trials, but we do have a government structure of both of federalism, and therefore not only the federal government oversees clinical research through the Code of Federal Regulations, but the states have an interest in the practice of medicine. And so both are important factors. So what does that really mean? Well, it means that for interventional trials, largely, I'll give you the framework that we use. For interventional trials, if you have a patient that resides in Kansas coming into your decentralized clinical trial, you should have a healthcare provider, PI or sub-I, that is licensed in Kansas. And so that's a pretty simple rule. Now, for non-interventional observational studies, it's again, devil's in the details. Every study protocol has to be looked at with fresh eyes. And generally that's not a requirement. So that's generally the overview of the regulatory environment. Maybe we can go to the next and final slide. I'm ending where I started out. I'm very excited about where we are with decentralized clinical trials and all the emerging technologies that are coming along with it, the sensors, the remote assessments of subjects with epilepsy. And I think that our capabilities are only growing, and that's very exciting. And the technology is allowing us to do what we all aspire to for many, many years, and that is put the patient and the caregiver family first. And so that's a very good place to end. So let me stop here and thank you very much.